What we're going to talk about today is how do we, as providers and leaders, and also advocates in the field, talk about psychedelic experiences in a way that maintains professionalism and integrity of the field. This is something that I care a lot about as a clinical psychologist. So who I am Dr. Lindsay Bira. I have my PhD in trauma and PTSD is one of my specialties as a clinical psychologist. I worked for the military for about 8 years as contract. And then I also specialize in what we call behavioral medicine. Behavioral medicine is about how we're living now, the stress that we carry now, and how that affects us in the long term in terms of our physical health. The number one killer of humans is cardiovascular disease. A big predictor of cardiovascular disease is behaviors. A big predictor of the behaviors that we choose on a daily basis is our stress level and our emotions. This is why I love my job as a psychologist, because I get to work with people on managing their emotions so they are integrated and whole and healthy. So I have a private practice. I work with people one-on-one. I also do speaking on topics where I integrate the neuroscience to make sure that we are functioning our very best. I'm also an adjunct medical professor at a medical school, and then I'm also the clinical advisor for New Life, which is a ketamine-assisted therapy company that I do integrate into my private practice. Okay. As we settle into this space, I just want to give an ode to Andrew Huberman. Who here watches the Huberman Lab and stays exactly? So he's now developed research on the top breath that we can take that relaxes our nervous system. This is where we take one deep inhale, and at the top we do an extra puff of air. And then we hold, and then we release. This opens up our lungs and allows us to absorb the most amount of oxygen. So we're gonna do 3 rounds of this, okay? So I want everybody to take a very deep breath, filling your lungs completely, doing that diaphragmatic inhale. At the very top, 1 extra puff of air. Hold, just notice, and release. Release it all, just settling into where you are. We're gonna do another inhale like that. Breathe all the way in, filling your lungs, using your belly. Another puff of air at the very top. Hold, just observing, noticing why you're here today, what your intention is, and then releasing all the way down, settling in, dropping those shoulders a little bit. Very last one, deep inhale in. Puff of air at the top, hold, just noticing, feeling a sense of gratitude, and then releasing, letting it all go, bring our presence into this space. Okay, now, as a clinical psychologist, where I've been stuck, allowed to be, in places that are very much about following the rules, this is a very interesting talk to give, because it's a lot about illegal things. Because most people who have had a psychedelic experience thus far have accessed it in the underground, mostly illegally. So when I was thinking about developing this talk, I was thinking about that concept, and I was feeling my own uncomfortable feelings around that. And then I started to think that we have actually evolved history by breaking the law. If we kind of look back into the civil rights movement, Rosa Parks sat down on a bus when she was not allowed to, right? This created a huge shift in humanity. Women would go to the polls and try to vote and probably submit votes secretly because they didn't have the right to. We broke rules to expand, right? We see this across history, right? So when I started thinking about that really made me think, well, rules sometimes need to be broken so that we can grow. And we're facing this movement within the psychedelic culture that a lot is happening underground. Most people are accessing it illegally, but that's the reality. And as a clinical psychologist, what I care about more than the law is talking about human reality. And so that's what we're here to do today. Okay. In every single presentation that I give, what we're all doing is we're practicing exercising our frontal lobe. Our frontal lobe is our executive functioning area. It gives us control over our attention, our emotion, and our behavior. And so as we move through this today, this is a lot about our own emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability to process emotional information and use it in reasoning and other cognitive activities. We use this for emotion regulation, behavior control, well-being, success, and positive relationships. Everything that we talk about today is about those last things. How do we make sure that we're doing the best thing that we can as humans within this space so that we're positively impacting other people and protecting ourselves and the field that's so new and developing? We've seen this happen where the psychedelic movement has come to the forefront and then things got a little willy-nilly and things got shut down, right? And so what I hear a lot is people talking about their psychedelic experiences in an unbridled way, which can actually have a negative effect that we've been seeing in clinical practice. And so we're going to talk about just putting some structure around that so that we all have words and tools to use whenever we're talking about psychedelics and that whole experience to protect other people and give an ode to the science. Now, I always do polls. We aren't able to access this poll because I don't have something that I can, do the internet with. So don't text this number. Whatever you do, don't text that. It won't work. But the first one was, has a psychedelic experience of your own been key to why you're interested in this field? So I just want you to observe that. What your answer is, I'm going to guarantee it's probably at least 90% plus yes. Poll number 2, have you struggled with how to share your experience? There's so many different audiences that we have in our life, from people who've never had this experience and wouldn't touch it and maybe judge it, to people on the whole end of the spectrum. We also have power differentials that we're facing whenever we're sharing, and we're going to break this down today. So first, let's think about why we share. Sharing is such a beautiful thing, and it actually creates a landscape to develop intimacy. So we share to process an experience, to process a positive one and reinforce what we got from it, and to process negative experiences. The number one predictor of resiliency as soon as something bad happens is our social support networks. Being able to lean on people who we know we can trust and allow them to hold us. So sharing experiences is actually very important, especially when something was negative. And we see this with all the integration support that we have with psychedelics, right? The number 2 reason why we share is to connect, just to form deeper relationships. And that's a beautiful thing. We want to share our experiences, especially when they're special and unique. Number 3, we share to help other people, to avoid pitfalls, to give them some tools and advice. We're supposed to be sharing these things. We also share, number 4, for ethical reasons, because we feel like we need to share our wisdom in order to help other people in humanity. Now, with psychedelics, and actually, let me move this chair right here. I can get a better view. Okay. With psychedelics, there's things that we need to consider whenever we're sharing this information. So 1, a lot is unknown in psychedelics. So yes, we have some pretty strong research, but we still need more, and we still need to develop the safe containers that people can come into and access these substances and these experiences in a way that's going to really facilitate their growth and not cause a problem, because we're seeing that. So there's a lot unknown with psychedelics, and we just have to honor that. We don't have to change it, we just have to say that's a fact. Number 2, there are power differentials and influence. What I think is so interesting about this one, I already mentioned Andrew Huberman, right? And we have some other kind of key players in the field, and I observe them, and they don't talk a lot in depth about their experiences, but they've had them. And I've heard kind of in the circles, like who shows up where to these psychedelic experiences, and they've been there. But they're not sharing in detail. Why? Because they have such a huge power effect. And if you're a provider or a leader in the field, we have to be very, very aware of this number 2. Because if we're saying, oh my gosh, I had this profound experience and this is the answer, then we're having a lot of ears hearing this, and it's like hanging a carrot on a stick for people who might not have the resources, might not have the social support, and might not have the community in which to navigate these experiences safely. And as a clinical psychologist, I'm very concerned about that. I'm very excited about the field, but I'm concerned about that, and it's something we need to pay attention to. Number 3 with psychedelics. Pretty much everything right now is happening on the underground. Yes, we have ketamine. I integrate ketamine legally into my private practice. I view ketamine as a beautiful opener into a psychedelic experience or a psychedelic journey, but everything else is underground. So this means there's a lot of range of what people are accessing, how they're accessing it, who's leading it. We cannot control that right now. I think MAPS is doing a great job with creating the model for MDMA and training people up on that, and that's great. We really need that container, and we need to keep containers very strong in this way. But right now, if people are going to access it, they're going on the underground. Number 4, heavy guidance is needed, from the tools that people need to navigate the experience while they're under to the integration support after. This is huge. When people are accessing it on their own, they are having some bad experiences, and there's a lot of work that has to be done afterwards. I'll tell you, I was just talking to one of my psychologist colleagues who we've had a very similar training path. She has a private practice as well, and she just has a new client who has had a absolutely horrific psychedelic experience, and it has completely decompensated her, and she's having to do a lot of work to bring her back even close to where she was with baseline. And we're seeing this over and over and over. People aren't talking about it because who's going to talk about that? They just went totally downhill. They're scared to tell anybody about it. They don't have the right support, so they're seeking support behind closed doors. As a psychologist, we're talking about this with the consultation in private practice, so it is something that's happening, and we need to be very careful about this. Okay, number 5, if we're talking about our psychedelic experiences, I mean, it sounds pretty out there. Like this stuff, if somebody hasn't had the experience, then it sounds a little bit nuts, right? So we have to understand how to both talk about our experiences, but maintain that level of professionalism, and that's where this structure and the science comes in. All right, what do we want to avoid? I was talking to Dustin, who's the psychedelic attorney. Do you guys know of him? I think he's here somewhere. He works with Dr. Michelle Weiner, who does the ketamine. Anyway, chatted with him, and I said, what do we need to think about in terms of legalities? Because I know a lot of providers have accessed this illegally. So does that put us at risk? Would the licensing board ever come after us? And he said, 1, yes, it's illegal. The licensing boards probably don't care enough about it. But we also need to be very vague whenever we talk about our experiences. I wonder, is it possible to lower the volume over here? Do you mind? Thank you guys so much. Okay, we want to be very vague when we're talking about our experiences because we don't want to promote the seeking of any illegal activity, especially if you're a provider who holds a license in some area. That could be very dangerous because if somebody seeks that experience and has a bad experience and then goes to the police about it, then you're going to be held accountable, right? So we're in this funny zone where we want to allow people to access experiences, and there's an ethical responsibility that we do have to help people access them in safe ways, but it's all still very illegal, so we need to be careful with that. Number 2, we want to avoid neglecting the science and themes. And I'm going to lay some of these themes out for you in just a second, so you have this to put in your back pocket. We also want to avoid oversharing because this influences somebody's expectations of their own experience. This is a huge one. I'm going to talk about this in a second. And then we also want to avoid giving specific recommendations unless we're working within the field, in some ways we're really having a heavy hand on patients. Okay, so case study here, George's difficult experience. So I'm going to pull in some case studies that are both my own and several of my colleagues, right? So case study with George here. So this caused actually a problem for a colleague of mine, where a colleague of mine had given him access to a way to get psilocybin, mushrooms, right? He then proceeded to share this access and share the information of this practitioner to multiple of his friends. So now the practitioner is being contacted by multiple people saying, I heard that you can help me find shrooms, right? 1, this definitely puts somebody at risk. Number 2, though, George went off on his own because he was hearing how amazing shrooms were. He did not have the community that allowed him access to a facilitator and had a very difficult journey. We're not going to say, bad experience, but difficult journey on his own that made him tank in terms of his treatment goals and where he could even focus next. This is what we want to avoid with psychedelics. We're not trying to have such a big experience that it takes us out of our responsibilities. We want to really facilitate these experiences so that people are enhanced, right? That is the goal, but that takes a very close handle on somebody's experience. So this is what we're seeing over and over, and one reason why I'm giving this talk. Okay, so 4 things to consider as you're sharing your psychedelic experience. 1, legalities. Just keep it as minimal as possible. I asked Dustin, what if somebody asks you directly, well, where did you get it? Like, where did you find that? Where did you have that experience? You just say very minimally, oh, I had it in some place that was legal, but I really don't share where, because everybody's kind of on their own path to find it. We allow other people to kind of be on their own paths. Here's Dustin, right. So if you guys don't know of Dustin, he's based here in Miami, and he's Mr. Psychedelic Law. He knows everything. He started in cannabis, and now he's moved into the other psychedelics. So if anybody here does have a question regarding the legalities, reach out to him. He's great. Okay, another thing to consider whenever you're about to share your psychedelic experience, your emotional state. If you are recently out of it and supercharged about this amazing experience that you have, you're probably going to overshare depending on your audience. There might be somebody that you can trust, but we have to be very careful because when we're really hyped about something, we're oversharing and we may be over-promoting in a way that could be dangerous, right? Also, if we're feeling really, really down about a bad experience, we don't want to say that something is totally bad because then that changes, again, somebody's view of what might happen for them. We also want to pay attention to who our audience is. Is there that power differential? Are we talking to somebody who has training in psychedelics? Who is it that we're speaking to? Is it our colleague who's never had that type of experience? We have to be careful with this. And then number 4, we have dangers of talking about any details. Now, when we have a very expansive psychedelic experience, we want to talk about the details, and we need to process that with a trained integration professional. When we are sharing about all these details with our friends or other people, what we're actually doing is we're creating their own expectation for their experience, which can actually decrease the chance that they would have a therapeutic, beneficial experience. And this is where we get to Becca. So Becca's psilocybin experience. Becca had been hearing from so many people that doing shrooms at a higher dose was going to be profound, amazing, that she was going to go places and get messages that were going to heal her trauma. So she worked with somebody, actually a trained professional, to do a psilocybin experience, but she did not get any of that. And this actually caused a spiritual trauma for her because she said, why aren't my higher beings or higher gods speaking to me? Why didn't I get that experience? And it's only because so much of that expectation has been set by other people, right? So what we really want to shift to is saying, we don't know exactly what happens, and everybody's path is different. For me, I saw it very visually, or I got this, but it can be different. We have to be totally open to the experience with no expectations, just the tools that we take with us as we go in, which we're going to review. Okay, how to share. We want to keep it general and minimal as much as possible, unless you're talking to your deepest trusted loved one or your integration specialist, okay? 2, we want to explain the more general topic of non-ordinary states of consciousness. This is what we're experiencing when we're under psychedelics. What are non-ordinary states of consciousness? This is simply the brain functioning in a way that's different, that allows us to have new awareness. When we talk to somebody who has not done any psychedelics, what I usually say is, even looking at a sunset that just makes you go, holy smokes, that's gorgeous. That is a little brief, non-ordinary state of consciousness. Everything calms down, we get that natural sense of awe. We might even feel a sense of oneness in that moment that makes us feel more connected to ourselves and maybe a higher power. Everybody kind of knows what that feels like, right? That is a non-ordinary state of consciousness that's not substance dependent. So when we're talking to somebody who doesn't understand psychedelics, there's a danger in saying, oh, it's wild, it's amazing, it takes you these crazy places you wouldn't understand because you haven't done it. What we want to do is we want to start to link it to things that people do understand so it doesn't sound so woo-woo and scary. Because again, this is why the field got shut down before, right? So we don't want to create that polarization of people who are doing psychedelics and speaking about psychedelics and the people who aren't, because that's where we get into dangerous territory. So we want to say, well, it's a substance that allows your brain to function differently, that allows you to experience a non-ordinary state of consciousness, like when you see a sunset and feel that feeling of spirituality, or when you're alone in the woods and just feel that sense of oneness, or when you look at a child that's just so innocent and happy playing, where you just kind of feel so in the moment. These substances help our brain shift that allow us to stay in that state for longer periods, that allows us to make connections and have realizations. Do you feel how that feels suddenly so approachable and logical? Exactly. So non-ordinary states of consciousness, are pretty huge to kind of touch on. So I think that always has to be a part of what we talk about when we talk about this. Oops. Okay. Number 3, we want to be research focused. So anybody who's talking about their psychedelic experience, I do think we have a responsibility to kind of know what the research is saying. And there's things that you can follow that give you just like a quick update. I mean, look, I'm not even good at looking at all the research. It's exhausting. At the end of the day, I'm tired. I'm not going to dig through all the research, right? But we kind of want to get the pulse on what's going on with it. So we want to be able to say, yes, there's been good research, and we still need more. We also want to share about the tools and the skills that are needed for psychedelic experiences because guess what? They relate to everything else in life. Okay, so let me tell you about this one. So this is another case study. So this relates to the tools and the skills. So I run a private practice, right? And I integrate ketamine in my private practice. So I get a call from somebody who I kind of know, right? Not very closely, but within the network. And Charlie says, "Oh my God, I need your help, I'm not okay." And I said, "Well, what's going on?" He said, "I just did my first ketamine experience and it got super dark. I had mad anxiety, I was yelling for my wife, needed to hold her hand. It was really bad, I will never do the second one. I don't understand what happened." When I asked him a little bit more about what happened, what I realized is nobody gave him the tools. Nobody gave him the little algorithms of what to do as his body went into that really intense, essentially medically induced K-hole. That's basically what we're doing with ketamine, right? We're medically inducing a K-hole. If you don't expect a K-hole, it's gonna terrify you. If you don't know what to do with a K-hole, it's gonna be really scary. But if you understand what's happening and you have the tools to navigate that as you go under, it can be extremely powerful. But nobody gave him the tools. So therefore, it was not just a bad experience, it was a negative experience that triggered anxiety, and he was not gonna complete the process that was probably gonna help him, right? So I said, okay, just meet with me for 45 minutes, I'm gonna give you the tools, and guess what? He did every single other session, and he was like, I cannot believe how key that was for me to understand what was happening to me and for me to drop fear and step into trust. And then he got some pretty profound things, and it really helped him, right? So let's talk about the tools. So here are the tools. And it's actually the tools that apply to most things in life. But if we remember these concepts as we're going under a psychedelic, then we have the tools to help us navigate through. So the other thing I'll say about these tools is by practicing these under psychedelics, we're actually reinforcing our ability to step into them in real life, right? So we have trust, just trusting the process, trusting the container, trusting the professional that has led you to this. That's why having the right person working with you is so important because there has to be a high level of trust there. 2, surrender. So totally being open to whatever is being presented to you and just allowing yourself to go, right? Huge one. Acceptance of any sensations that are happening, again, allowing yourself to flow through. Curiosity, so show me more, help me understand. Just giving people those words to say while they're having an experience can be really, really powerful. Instead of seeing the dark, scary thing and then saying, I don't want to see this, now we get into a state of resistance, now heart rate is increasing, blood pressure is increasing while you're under a psychedelic. That never leads to a good place. That's just always gonna get weirder and weirder. I give this example from one of my own ketamine journeys. So I did the whole ketamine process, of course, before I integrated it into my practice. And I was, kind of being pulled through a lot of different things. And then I was brought to the ocean. And the ocean, I love a bright, shiny ocean with the sunshine. I don't like an ocean at night, necessarily, right? So it's the ocean at night. And I was kind of like moving over this, and it looked like I was gonna go through. And I started to have that panic response of like, I don't wanna be in nighttime ocean water. Like, this doesn't feel good to me. But as soon as I remembered the tools that I'd been practicing mentally, right, and went through these, trust, surrender, acceptance, curiosity, show me, I'm open for this, right? The scene completely shifted from something that was scary, and I kind of got turned over and then saw some things that were very relevant to me and very symbolic and actually helped me significantly. But it was only through stepping into that trust and surrender and calming my nervous system with the tools that allowed me to get to the other side of that experience. Otherwise, I think it would have just been uncomfortable and dark, and I just would have been fighting it, and it would have been unsettling, right? So when patients don't have these kinds of tools and somebody to walk them through what these tools feel like, we're kind of setting them up for probably statistically a less good experience and potentially a bad one. So these are always really good. Number 5 is just observation. Like, let's just observe without attaching any meaning and roll through the experience. So these are the tools that everybody needs as they're going into a psychedelic experience, As a psychologist, when I'm working with somebody one-on-one, I also link this to their own treatment goals, of course, right? So we talk about, okay, if you've had a history of trauma, maybe childhood trauma in some way, how might this be presented to you, and how might we step into some of these tools so that you can flow through it instead of being in resistance? Why? Because this is all for you, right? We need to start to cue the nervous system in these ways. And when we're sharing about our psychedelic experiences, instead of saying, this being came down and told me the answers to things, and I think it was an alien, or I think it was God, I'm not sure. Instead, we can say, I visualized some things that made me really practice trust or surrender into my higher self, and I realized X, Y, and Z. Do you see how that feels different? And we're not polarizing groups of people. People are going to say, whoa, that sounds a little crazy. We want to keep everything integrated. All right. Now the skills. The skills that we are actually developing through psychedelic experiences, there's many, but they're actually the same skills that we've been measuring in therapeutic outcome research for decades and decades. This is cognitive flexibility or psychological flexibility. When you go through a psychedelic experience, it shows you other ways to think about things. It shows you behind issues. This allows us to think and let go of some of our interpretations of things that we've been holding that have been trauma-related. When we can think flexibly from a higher level about something, suddenly we become free from the interpretation that's kept us stuck. This is still what we're measuring in outcomes with psychedelics, whether it's outcomes with cognitive behavioral therapy, or now we're looking at psychedelics. Cognitive flexibility is key. Number 2, tolerance of uncertainty. This is uncomfortable. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm willing to tolerate it because I have some treatment goals. Another huge one. Everything I do as a psychologist is developing these things in people. Cognitive flexibility, tolerance of uncertainty, and tolerance of distress. When we look at models of panic and anxiety, what that is cognitive rigidity, intolerance of uncertainty, and intolerance of distress. Panic disorder specifically is the sensitivity to physiological symptoms. So if I'm standing here on stage and I'm having like a natural nervousness response, my heart rate's beating, I'm having difficulty catching my breath, my interpretation of that is, well, of course, because I'm public speaking in front of a bunch of strangers who are having their own thoughts, right? That's a normal process for my nervous system to respond. If I have cognitive rigidity or a panic model, my brain will start to say, oh my God, my heart rate is beating, my heart's beating, I can't breathe, this is not good, it's going to swing into something that I can't control, people are noticing that I'm nervous, now I'm having more of a stress response, right? This is how things flow into a full panic attack. So what we do in treatment, no matter what we're doing, but especially evidence-based treatment, is we're creating more cognitive flexibility, the tolerance of uncertainty and the unknown of why we're having sensations, and the tolerance of those sensations in themselves. When we do exposure therapy, we actually bring in the sensations of panic. So I have my patients hyperventilate in session. We both hyperventilate over and over and over to mimic the symptoms of a panic attack, because we're changing the brain's relationship to those symptoms. Because now the brain says, oh, so I can have these symptoms and they're fine? So now I'm not scared of them, right? We totally habituate and desensitize to the fear that was attached to the symptoms. That's what I do all the time in therapy. I think everybody can benefit from those interoceptive exposures. Psychedelics are getting at the same thing. Psychedelics pull you into something that's very uncomfortable, but allows you to tolerate it, and then you realize that surrender, trust, acceptance is actually safe, right? So we can see how all these things kind of link together, but in my view as a clinical psychologist, an evidence-based provider, and an adjunct medical professor, is that what we're looking at with psychedelics is not that different than what we've always been looking at, which is these things that we're trying to develop, right? It's just a new vehicle. And if we can explain it like that, now we've not polarized the people, right? We don't sound too woo-woo. We say, no, it's just another tool that we know can work. Okay, now, how to share the tools and skills-oriented. We also want to share healthy trepidations and commitment to science. And I challenge everybody here with this, because I see a real danger in people kind of moving through the world saying, woo, 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 psychedelics, this is the answer, everybody, my experience was amazing. We're going to create that polarization. It's going to start to sound really weird to people, and it's actually going to damage the field. So we want to share trepidation with this. We want to say, yes, this is one of my most profound experiences, and we have to also be careful because it's very underground, unregulated, and we need to figure out how to make this safe for people. See how that sounds, right? It's like an asterisk to it, and it's very true. and a commitment to science. We just need more research, et cetera. Okay, we're going to do a little integration session here, a little breakout. If you're sitting next to somebody and want to share your story, now you don't have to share your story, so I want to put this on here, is nobody in here is going to know if the person next to you is sharing their real story or if they're making up a story to share, okay? Because nobody should feel pressured to share their story. So totally make one up. But what I want you to do is turn to the person next to you, and I want you to use this model to share, make up, whatever, a story about your psychedelic experience, or if you're pretending to be somebody with a psychedelic experience, how that might go. If you don't have somebody close to you, just do it in your head. Whatever you feel. Scoot next to somebody, whatever. Take a couple minutes. Okay, for time purposes, not everybody is going to get a share. That's okay. Just going through it once is a good practice. But if you didn't take a picture of this slide or write it down, I encourage you to, just so you can refer to it later. And there might be a point that you might need to share it with somebody else. So if you feel like one of your friends or colleagues is oversharing, this would be a great thing to show them and just kind of say, this is kind of a framework that's been recommended of how we kind of explain what experiences we've had for several different reasons. Okay. Integration number 2, we're not going to necessarily break out and do this, but I want you to think about what your healthy trepidation will sound like. So your healthy hesitancy, as you're communicating about psychedelics to somebody else, what do you want to add in there that says, it's amazing, and the research shows that it's good, and also, we need to be careful. So what does that sound like for you? Just a couple seconds of what you want to add in. Trepidation is kind of a scary word, but I think if we add healthy on the front, it sounds a little better. Healthy trepidation. Okay. Now this is poll number 3. Do you feel better prepared in some way to discuss psychedelics and your experiences with this little framework? At least a little bit? I'm so glad about that, you guys. Thank you. And if you need any extra support, right, you can always reach out. So I do have a private practice. I work with people one-on-one with evidence-based therapy. I also do coaching and some integration work. So always feel free to reach out. If I can't help, I have a multitude of colleagues that I always make sure you're connected to and who can help. Now, let me give you some quick integration resources. And if you have your phone, I would take pictures of these because these are ones that I've collected and are very strong. Number 1, we got the psychedelic attorney. You need legal advice? This is your guy, okay? Feel free to take a picture. Dustin is so helpful, and he knows everything. Number 2, if you haven't heard of ICERS.org, they actually offer 5 free integration sessions. You just apply. And so if you know anybody who needs some extra integration support by a trained professional, but maybe they don't have the money to pay, ICERS is a great location for that. We also have another one, the Fireside Project. I was just talking to somebody who said that they have more trained integration specialists than they have incoming calls. So they actually want more people to contact them so that they can work on integration and train up their providers. So huge resource, ICERS and Fireside, huge. We also have my colleague, Anna Bouma. So she is an integration specialist based here in Miami and New York, and she does amazing work with working with clients with psychedelics and also doing integration. So she's an amazing resource. We also have Kashi, who happens to be here right now. What a guy. So he has helped me so much. He's helped other people that I know so much. He does amazing biohack, breath, and brain optimization work. What does this mean? To me, I think, Kashi really has the ability to tune in and understand what you need in the moment in order to ground you, stabilize you, and support your growth. Whether that has to do with a psychedelic or not, this is key. So thank you, Kashi. And if anybody wants to talk to him afterwards, there he is. All right, now we're gonna open up for about 10 minutes of questions and answers if anybody has them. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
First of all, you're fantastic.
Thank you.
I really enjoy what you're talking about. I have been profoundly affected positively from taking psychedelics in the last year and a half of my healing journey. You may not be able to answer this question because you're a PhD and you're above ground.
Yeah.
Of this world, and I'm very respectful of everything you talked about. The question is this: you're working with a patient, you're working with me or somebody else. You've done the conversation, you moved into ketamine. Do you really believe that the next step that you would provide benefit would be either MDMA with psilocybin? You're not, again, not having you share. You're not going to be the one to do it because you're above ground. Do you have an ecosystem? Because I'm moving to Florida early next year. Do you have an ecosystem of a support system where you can then provide that next step?
Yes. This is a great question, so thank you for asking it. So what the question was is, obviously I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and professor functioning on the above ground, right? So there's a lot of risk for me to really put some hands into that world. But if I have a patient who maybe does the ketamine and could benefit from the next step of going deeper, what do I do then? Can I soft refer to people who are working in the space? And what I love about this is in February, I attended the 2-day Harvard Medical School Summit on psychedelics. I don't know if anybody here went to that. I think they hold it every year, and you can tune in virtually. Amazing. Wow, I learned so much. One of the things that they said, all those top researchers from Harvard Med and UCLA and everywhere that's doing Johns Hopkins, what they said was, even licensed providers in the above ground have an ethical responsibility to make sure people get connected to the right resources rather than going off on their own and finding something that's not good, right? Now, talking with Dustin, the lawyer, he said, be very careful about this, right? The law perspective is always going to be stringent and fear-based, obviously, and we want to heavily consider that. But we also have an ethical risk mitigation responsibility for a client of ours that might benefit if we connect them to somebody who we know and trust. So, valid question. And yes, I do think, and I have referred to people who I know who are working in the space, if I have a very trusted client. So this has to be a long-term client who I know is pretty stable and who I also trust that isn't going to have an experience and come back to me, right? But there's risk in that because then they can tell their friends and then, so, it's a great question. I think all providers are kind of dealing with this, but I think that there is some safety in being able to refer to somebody and just kind of say, look, I've heard this person works in this space and they're really good. If you're really seeking that, go for it, but it's your own experience that you're seeking. Great question. Awesome, back there. Yes, okay. So how do you know treatment gain from the ketamine whenever you're working with it? Because you're not in their mind, exactly. So one, you do 4 to 6 sessions of ketamine, so that's kind of the recommended dose based on the research, right? So you know that people are gonna get the most benefit from that, but then the key thing is the integration. So after every session, I talk to my patient saying, okay, what happened? What came up? What was difficult? What is the symbolism? How does that relate to your growth? How can we transmute something or reappraise something that actually allows you to reattach or attach more strongly to your treatment goals and integrate this into your life? So to me, when I see growth happen, a lot of it has to do with those tools, like, oh my gosh, I surrendered to this, and then I was shown something that means a lot to me. So then I reinforce that tool of surrender and letting go of the rigid anxiety rules or whatever it is that they're holding on to that's preventing their success, right? Sometimes they get shown something about how to love a difficult person in their life, their mother or something like that, right? So then we have a whole integration conversation about how that would play out in a conversation with their mom. So it might not ever come with the full protocol of how to implement it into their life, but that's why good integration, knowing the client that you're working with, is so important, because then you can role model and plan for that conversation and then check up on it. So yeah, and I also use evidence-based measures of anxiety and PTSD. Yeah, great question. Yeah. Yeah. Because the ketamine clinics don't do a great job of prep and integration. And I'm kind of working with some of them and kind of trying to get that importance in there. So I would look for an external integration expert, kind of like Anna Booma, who I put up there, but there's quite a few, right? So I think it's very important for them to get attached to somebody. In terms of mental health professionals, not many licensed mental health professionals have experience in the integration or even know what the psychedelic sphere is, right? So I think it's harder to find a trained mental health professional than it is a trained integration expert, but I do think it's key to be working with somebody. I know. And therein lies the problem. I know. It's so unregulated. It's like the wild, wild west. And this is why we're seeing so many problems. And this is why I'm a little scared as a clinician, and why we've seen some like really big 911 cases, and why, you know, when somebody has a profound experience that's bad or they can't make sense of it, they are exhibiting features of psychosis. Like this is, so if they walk into a hospital and they say, you know, I talked to these aliens and they showed me some dark things and I don't like, they're going to get 5150'd or hospitalized mandatorily, right? And then they're probably going to be given the shot of the antipsychotic medication, and now we have a whole problem. So we need to be very careful about that because it is an unregulated field. And so what I would do is I would look for, use your network. Our networks, our social support networks, are the strongest because it's the core people that we trust and the next ring of people that we trust and the next one. And so if we start to ask the questions, we usually get the links. And so I would say trust your network and see who you can find. Or, you know, a situation like this, the network here, or MAPS, if you know anybody connected, usually they can refer. Or ICERs and Fireside, because we know that they're regulating things, right? Great question. I saw one back there. Yeah, and I'll go to you next. Yeah. What are the top things to use ketamine for that's been shown in evidence? So the reason why we started to use ketamine was for suicidality, because patients were undergoing surgery and then saying, why is my suicidality gone? And they kind of broke it down and said, we think it has to do with ketamine. And so ketamine has a very profound effect on decreasing suicidality. So a patient will want to kill themselves every day, and then they do a big dose of ketamine, and they're like, it's gone. That's weird, right? Even young people who are doing a lot of cutting, if they do a ketamine therapy session, their cutting intrusions decrease. So there's something that's happening in the brain, and I think it has to do with the default mode network, which makes us feel really isolated and like other, that is helping with that. So number one is suicidality and kind of chronic suicidal ideation. We also say treatment-resistant depression. What does that mean? That means that you've tried at least 2 evidence-based modalities to treat your depression, and neither has worked. So that could be 2 SSRIs or an SSRI and cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So that's treatment-resistant depression. But we're also showing now that anxiety benefits, PTSD benefits, and we have some evidence around OCD. And if you ask me, why is this? Why is it that it's very beneficial for suicidality, but then we're seeing it linked to these other things? I think it has to do with the tools. I think it has to do with being able to step into surrender, acceptance, trust, curiosity, observation, which is the opposite of anxiety and PTSD, right? That's all rigidity, distrust, I need to have the answer, I have to block everything out. So I think psychedelics are really creating this model to where somebody can practice those skills and then it's being reinforced in the brain. So I think ketamine, we have the growth factor and the way that the cells kind of come together a little bit more, the neurogenesis. So it's reinforcing that. And so to me, it makes sense that it helps. And it'll be interesting to see if we see it with more things. And it's also interesting, I was on a panel earlier today about ketamine for creativity and performance. All of our research dollars are for below sea level, right? It's like disorder, and how do we get them back to up to here? Well, what about people who are already above sea level, but we want to expand or work on our creativity? Where is the ceiling, right? It's very fascinating. I think there's huge, huge benefit there, but no research dollars are going to really be put to that because it's not a bleeding neck issue. And so a lot of it's just being explored on the sidelines, right? And it's okay. Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, question here. Yes. So the question is, if a patient is saying they want to seek a psychedelic experience, when do you say no? So basically, don't. What are the contraindications? So one, if they're on an SSRI, because that just might be too much serotonin and too much for the brain, so you can actually induce serotonin syndrome, among other things. Two, if they have a history of psychosis in their family. This is an interesting one because it requires more of an assessment, because sometimes people have histories of substance-induced psychosis, so their family members were alcoholics or maybe drug users, and that induced their psychotic episodes. So that's not a genetic substance, or not a genetic psychosis, right? So that's different than like a genetic loaded psychosis, but we always have to be careful with that. Yeah, I think they're basically the only two, but also some stability, because these can be really destabilizing. So you want them to be in a stable spot, having the tools as well. So that's something that I'm very careful about. Yeah, great question. Yeah, anything else? Are you good? Okay, cool. Any other questions, guys? We're pretty much done. Do you have a question? Yeah, go. Yeah. Yeah. So talking about being a sales rep and the high pressure that's around that, and how this can easily start to create a stress response, a burnout model, negativity, which actually gets in the way of your ability to do good sales, right? So it becomes a snake eating its tail. And so he was asking, he's found some good effects from using psilocybin. How do we suggest that to people if you really think it'll help with their neuroticism and everything? This is always, I think, a case-by-case basis. But I also don't think, if you're not licensed and you don't have a license to lose, I don't think that there's a lot of risk in kind of saying, this has been something that's helped me. I'm not saying you should, but it's something to maybe look into or consider. Or even, I always say the best way to get somebody else in therapy is to talk about your own therapy. People are like, how do I get my mother-in-law in therapy? I'm like, well, just talk about how great your therapy is, and then they'll be like, I want to try that. So it's like, that's another thing that you could do, is just say like, wow, I really struggled with this, and then I have some friends who are in this space, and I just did some microdosing and shrooms, and I got in touch with my kind of inner joy, and it's just like taken off a layer. It's been really helpful. So you're not giving the suggestion, but you're kind of planting the seed a little bit, right? Which is something that we do need to be careful with, because we don't want to hang the carrot like it's a huge answer, because it's not for everybody. But I do think if it's part of your truth, you should be allowed to share your truth, especially when you're standing on a platform of caring for other people, which you are. Yeah, great question. Yeah, thank you guys. Okay, we're out of time. Thank you guys so much. Feel free to come up to me afterwards. Thank you. Oh, and I am running a 5-day challenge next week, right before Thanksgiving. We all know Thanksgiving is very stressful. We have to go home with family and blah, blah, blah. So if you want to be a part of my challenge, My Instagram is at Dr. Lindsay Bira. Just shoot me a message on Instagram with the word challenge, and I will loop you in, and it's free. So we're just gonna kind of meet once a day and work on, there's gonna be a little bit of breath work component. There's gonna be some mindset stuff, and just making sure that we're all set up successfully for the holidays. So if you wanna be a part of that, it's something that I'm offering just to Wonderland, because I'm happy to be here, a part of this community, and I think we need to support each other. So 5-day challenge next week, at Dr. Lindsay Bira, shoot me a message. At DrLindsayBira. Thank you, guys. Bye.